ever walk into a store and think, whoa, how can they even charge that? Or like that whole baby formula shortage thing. Yeah, well, that's international trade. Sneaky little sneaks.
Mm.
It is shaping our world, whether we realize it or not. And today, we're really going to unpack America's trade story, especially with China.
And to help us with this, you've given us some interesting pieces from this mandate for leadership, the
Yeah.
conservative promise thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a policy debate,
Mm-hmm.
really laying out two totally different ways of looking at how America should be playing the whole global trade game.
Right. Like head-to-head with Peter Navarro, he was a big deal in the White House, right?
Yeah.
Advocating for fair trade, basically saying the current system is totally screwing America over.
Yeah.
And then in the other corner, we've got Kent Lassman from that Heritage Foundation think tank. He's all about that free trade, less government, more market magic. That's his recipe for success.
And it's not just, understanding these two big ideas, fair trade versus free trade.
Yeah.
That's key to really getting this whole thing and forming like an educated opinion.
Okay, so let's start with Navarro. His big argument is America's getting a bad deal in this global trade game, and it's hurting us bad, like American workers, our industries, even our national security. He really lays it on thick.
He does. And it boils down to this idea that the current system, while like claiming to be fair, actually lets other countries walk all over the U.S. He specifically talks about that most favored nation rule from the World Trade Organization.
Right.
Sounds good, right? Everyone gets the same low tariffs.
Yeah, makes sense.
But Navarro's like, hold on a second, it doesn't actually work out that way.
Interesting.
Like he uses this example of car tariffs.
Okay.
The U.S. has a 2.5% tariff on cars. It seems pretty fair, right?
Yeah.
Then you look at the EU, they're charging 10%, China 15%, and Brazil, whoa, 35% tariff.
Wow.
Suddenly not so level playing field, is it?
No, not at all.
Navarro's point is, how are American businesses supposed to compete when they're starting off with that kind of disadvantage?
Yeah, it's a good point. And he doesn't just stop there. He actually put forward this proposal called the United States Reciprocal Trade Act, the USRTA.
Right.
Almost like he's saying, you want to play rough, we can play rough too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was all about giving the president more muscle to negotiate lower tariffs with this kind of implied threat like shape up or we'll hit you back.
Yeah.
Now, whether that would really work in the long run, well,
That's a debate for another day.
exactly.
But it shows he's serious about this.
Oh, he's serious. And to prove it, his team, they actually ran simulations of this USRTA thing, and they projected it could really slash the U.S. trade deficit, like billions of dollars, maybe even create a ton of jobs.
Big promises, but we got to remember those were just projections.
Of course.
It still shows he means business. Now there's one country that gets Navarro particularly fired up,
I wonder.
and that's China. He doesn't beat around the bush. He calls their economic moves aggression, straight up.
And to get why, you got to understand the main thing, which is that China getting richer isn't just about them getting richer. He sees it all tied up in them wanting to be top dog of the world superpower. And he thinks they'll bend the rules and even break them to get there.
That's a bold statement, and he backs it up with a ton of examples in this material. He lists over 50 ways. He says China is playing this economic aggression game.
He does.
Kind of overwhelming.
It's a lot. He breaks it down, though, to make it a little easier.
Yeah.
He talks about how they protect their own markets with all these barriers, how they use shady tactics to grab market share globally, and, of course, the big one, stealing intellectual property in tech.
And he's not just throwing around accusations. He's got stats like he says intellectual property theft alone that costs the U.S. somewhere between $180 billion to $540 billion a year.
Yeah.
That's not pocket change.
No, it's serious stuff. And it shows how huge this is for Navarro. Like, for him, it's not just about some competition thing. It's about national security. It's about protecting America's future.
Which brings us to Navarro's solutions. And let me tell you, they're not for the faint of heart. He's basically saying we got to break up with China completely, economically and financially. No more sleepovers.
Right. He is not afraid to take a hard line.
No, he's talking about slapping tariffs on everything from China, giving huge bonuses to companies that move production back to the U.S., even barring Chinese companies from getting government contracts or investing in our tech stuff.
He's even said we should ban those Chinese social media apps like TikTok.
Yeah.
National security threat, he says.
Right. I mean, some of these ideas are extreme. They would definitely shake things up globally. There'd be winners, losers. Not everyone would be happy.
For sure.
But before we get into that, let's switch gears and see what Kent Lassman has to say. His take is like the complete opposite. He's basically saying, hold your horses, everyone. Free trade made America great, and all this government meddling is going to make things worse.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting because it makes us ask some big questions.
Yeah.
What should the government be doing? What about the power of the free market? How do we protect America but also be part of the global economy? It's a lot.
It is, so let's dive into Lassman's view and see what he suggests we do instead.
So Lassman's big thing is free markets. He believes in them big time. He sees tariffs as basically sneaky taxes, hidden taxes on regular people, driving prices up and hurting the very people they're supposed to be helping. And he's not so sure about the government's ability to manage the economy, let alone actually fix anything.
Right.
Clear thing, like in a truly free market.
And he's got some points. For example, he says American manufacturing, it's not actually dying like some people think.
Yeah.
He says it's booming, hitting record highs, and he credits that to something he calls incredible productivity gains.
Yeah, what he means by that is basically we're doing more with less. Like American businesses have gotten so efficient making more stuff with fewer resources and fewer workers.
So he's saying this efficiency, it's a sign of strength, not weakness.
Exactly. It shows how adaptable the American economy is.
Interesting. And speaking of turning things on their head, remember that whole baby formula shortage?
Oh, yeah.
Lassman uses that as a prime example of how those protectionist policies, the ones Navarro loves, they can actually backfire and make us more vulnerable.
Yeah, because what you're saying, before that whole thing went down, because of trade barriers, we already had like 98% of baby formula being made right here in the U.S.
Wow.
So we were super reliant on just a handful of companies.
Right.
So when that one big plant in Michigan had to shut down because of contamination, there was nothing to fall back on.
So instead of protecting us, those barriers actually made the crisis way worse.
Exactly. And it all comes back to Lassman's point about having a bigger, more diverse market, more competition that forces companies to get creative and keep prices down.
Right.
Plus, it gives us more options, more redundancy in the supply chain, so we're less likely to get hit so hard by disruptions.
Makes sense. So if tariffs and protectionism aren't the answer, what does Lassman suggest? He doesn't seem like the type to just sit on his hands.
Oh, you're right. He's got ideas. And they're pretty different from Navarro's. If Navarro wants to build walls for us, Lassman wants to tear them down.
Okay.
He's all about less government, more free market, let the invisible hand do its thing.
So what's on his free market wish list?
Well, number one, tariff relief. He says tariffs, they're dragging the economy down, making prices higher than they need to be.
So he wants to get rid of them.
Or at least lower them, especially on things people need every day.
I bet that would be popular, especially with inflation the way it is.
Totally. It's all about putting consumers first, letting the market set prices naturally.
He's not just about tariffs, though, right?
Oh, no. He's got other targets like the Export-Import Bank.
Right.
He says that mainly helps out a few big companies, not the little guy.
So he'd shut it down.
At least reform it, yeah.
And then there's the Jones Act. I gotta be honest, I'm a little fuzzy on that one.
Sure, the Jones Act, it's this old law been around for like 100 years, and it was well-intentioned, but it's had some unintended consequences.
Like what?
Well, it basically says any ship-moving stuff between U.S. ports has to be American-built, American-owned, American-operated.
On the surface, that sounds kind of good. Protect American jobs, right?
Great. Very patriotic. But the thing is, it's made shipping within the U.S. way more expensive than it needs to be. Less competition, higher costs for businesses, and guess who ends up paying for it?
Consumers.
Bingo.
And I think Lassman had an example about oil, right?
Oh, yeah. He points out that because of this Jones Act thing, it can actually be cheaper for some East Coast ports to import oil from other countries.
Really?
Even from as far away as Russia than to ship it from, like, Texas or something.
That's crazy. Talk about unintended consequences.
Right. It all goes back to his point about free trade. Yeah, it's got its challenges, but it can also lead to lower prices, more efficiency, a stronger, more adaptable economy.
So basically he's saying, let's get rid of these obstacles and let the market do its thing.
Exactly, unleash the power of free trade.
So we've got these two totally different views on Trade Navarro's fair trade, where we got to fight back against unfair practices, especially from China.
Right.
And Lassman's free trade, let the market work its magic.
It's a fascinating debate.
It really is, and we have to remember these are just two takes on a complex issue.
For sure.
There's no easy answer, no magic wand.
The truth is usually somewhere in the middle.
Right, and that's what we do here. We don't tell you who's right or wrong. We give you the info, the different sides of the story, so you can make up your own mind.
Exactly. It's about understanding the nuances, the different angles, the what-ifs of different policies.
And it's about asking questions, digging deeper, not just accepting things at face value.
Because these aren't just ideas in a vacuum.
Right. These decisions, they affect real people, businesses, workers, everyone.
They shape the future.
Exactly. So before we wrap up, let's take a look and see if there's any common ground between these two seemingly opposite views. Are there any points where Navarro and Lassman actually agree?
Yeah, I mean, they seem to be coming from totally different places, but maybe there's some overlap, some shared concerns, even if they have different solutions up their sleeves.
Yeah, you're right. There are actually a few big things they agree on when you really look at it. Like, for all their differences, both Navarro and Lassman, they agree that China is a big deal, a real challenge for the U.S.
Okay.
They might not agree on exactly what that challenge is. Like, Navarro sees it as this deliberate attack on our economy, and Lassman sees it more like this complicated competition.
Right.
But they both know that China getting bigger economically and on the world stage means America needs to step up its game.
So it's not about pretending China's not a thing?
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about figuring out how we deal with this new reality, and that's where they go their separate ways.
Yeah, like they both see the storm coming, but they want to deal with it totally differently, right? Navarro's like hunker down and weather the storm, and Lastman's more like let's find a way around this thing.
Interesting.
And that brings us to another thing they kind of agree on, though it's a little nuanced. They both know that having allies and trade deals, those are important, even if they might have different friends and different terms in mind.
Right, like Navarro, he seems to like those one-on-one deals, with countries that are on our side.
Exactly.
And Lassman, he sees the value in both those kinds of deals and bigger team-ups, especially with other democracies that share our values.
And that just shows how complex this whole thing is. There's no one right answer, no magic solution. It's about finding that sweet spot. Protecting America, but also making sure trade is free and fair and dealing with this world that's changing all the time.
So much to think about. And honestly, I don't think either Navarro or Lassman would say they have all the answers.
Probably not.
But that's the beauty of these deep dives. We don't give you the answer. We give you the knowledge, different ways of looking at it so you can make up your own mind.
It's about understanding the details, the trade-offs, the what-ifs of different choices.
And it's about asking those tough questions, not just going with the flow, really digging into things.
Because this stuff matters. These aren't just ideas.
Right. These decisions affect real people, businesses, people's jobs. It's real life stuff.
It shapes the future.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with something to chew on. We've looked at two very different futures for America. And trade's one's all about fair trade, fighting back against anyone trying to take advantage. The other one's all about free trade, letting the market do its thing.
Right.
Maybe the real challenge and the real opportunity is finding that middle ground, a trade policy that looks out for America, but also uses the power of the global economy.
Finding that balance.
It's a tough one, but it's super important for where we go from here.